right, great. Good morning, everybody. I'm Joan Ford Monjo, Executive Director of the Malden Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to our virtual workshop on SBA lending. We have a lot of things to worry about now: the health of ourselves, the health of our loved ones, and the health of our business. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is the health of our businesses and how to secure financing for our businesses going forward. We're here with two of our local lenders right here in Malden. We have Johnny Long of East Cambridge Savings Bank and Raj Kalra of Eastern Bank. Both of these men have a lot of experience in banking and being in Malden. They're also your friends and neighbors. Johnny is the Business Development Manager at East Cambridge Savings. He's very active in the community, being on the board of the Malden Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition. He's also a member of Kiwanis. Raj is a Senior Business Relationship Manager at Eastern, where he's been for the past 5 years. Previously, he was at Citizens, but his entire career has been devoted to being a resource for small business owners. In his spare time, Raj is also working on his Master's in Finance at Bentley University. A few thank yous for making this entire event possible. First, I'd like to thank UMA, formerly known as MATV. I'd like to thank Yamo Hamlin and Ron Cox for producing this video call. I'd also like to give a sincere thanks to Emily Granoff, the District Director of the Office of Senator Jason Lewis, for hosting this GoToMeeting event. We will do the presentation, then we'll be taking a few questions that have been submitted in advance, as well as questions that have been put forward on the chat. At this point, I would like to introduce Johnny Long of East Cambridge Savings Bank and Raj Kalra of Eastern Bank.
We're under 150,000, and that accounts for about 17% of all the loans. 74% of all the loans that were submitted. Now, another number is that okay, let me just back. So 74% of that accounts for the number of loans submitted, which is about 58 billion. And that 58 billion accounts for 17% of all the loans that were approved, all the dollar amounts that were approved. Moving along to, if we want to talk about amounts, the next big concentration was loan sizes from 350,000 to $1 million, at 23% of all dollar amounts funded. So this kind of goes to show that it was focused on small business. Obviously, with a couple of outliers, we had about 9% of loans that were over 5 million. So this is a good chart to have. I mean, I think you could access this on the SBA website as well. I'm sure they'll update it within the coming week or two. Next slide, please. This is also something you could look at. It essentially separates all the loans approved by industry. Construction being number 1, professional, scientific and technical services being number 2. Again, you could look at this through the website. It's just some cool factoids, I guess. Next slide, please. Also, this slide pretty much just says you could find a PPP participating lender. Luckily, you have Johnny and I right here on the call, so you could reach out to us. But if for some reason you're not in our footprint or what have you, you can click on these links to find a PPP lender. I would say, now this is somewhat off the record, but I would say smaller banks have had maybe an easier time to getting these loans approved. I'm not sure why, but I have friends and customers that use other banks as well, and it seems that it was a little cumbersome with the bigger banks. Next slide, please. All right, so you have the PPP loan, or you're close to getting it. Now what? Next slide, please. This just goes over, this is just a link which I I think we could send this out just to kind of give you guidance on how to spend the funds. If you go to the next slide, next one. All right, so this is an important summary. This is a good page. So for all of you that have the loan or are about to receive the loan, like I mentioned, the first day of the 8-week forgiveness period starts on day one, once the funds are dispersed into your checking account. 75% of it should go to payroll costs to be forgiven. That includes compensation to employees up to $100,000 annually, paid leave, health group benefits, insurance premiums, retirement benefits, state and local taxes. So it does cover a good chunk. So that 75% of the loan should be spent on that portion. The other 25%, as mentioned earlier, can be spent on interest, mortgage interest, rent obligations that were actually put in place before February 15th. So I guess not if you just signed a lease in March. Utility payments for services that began before February 15th as well. So anything to kind of keep the doors open and, you know, lights on. So not at the bottom, it kind of just reiterates what I said. Not more than 25% of the loan forgiveness may be used for non-payroll costs. Must spend the funds you want forgiven within 8-week period. So I'll emphasize that again. So payroll, you know, try to spend 75% or more of that loan on payroll within the first 8 weeks to have it forgiven. Next slide, please. So maintain a head count. This is some good advice. I haven't received full facts on this yet, but so if a business's average full-time equivalent employees during each month of the 8-week period is less than the average during either the period from February 15, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020. At the business, so it's at your choice which head count you want to use. The forgiven amount is reduced by the percentage reduction in head count. An example, so if the head count is reduced by 10%, the loan amount is also reduced by 10%. So I think someone had a question like that earlier before we started the call, which we could address later. You know, what happens if you bring back less people? At this time, it looks like it will be reduced by that amount. And we can talk about that more a little later. Next slide, please. Maintain salary wages. The amount forgiven is reduced by the amount of any reduction in salary during the 8-week period that exceeds 25% of the employee's salary wages for the most recent full quarter. Kind of similar, you know, you want to maintain the wages that you have in the past. So essentially what this is, the basis of this program is, you know, as you know, is to keep jobs, keep people off unemployment. So, you know, at the same wage that they were making. Rehiring exemption. Now this is somewhat new to me, so I'll read this carefully. Importantly, the headcount and salary reductions discussed above will not apply if the business remedies the reduction on or before June 30th. This is designed to incentivize businesses to rehire laid off and furloughed employees. So that's good news. So if you are operating with less employees right now, as long as you hire them back and make up for it by June 30th, it looks like this, you know, the loan forgiveness will still be forgiven at the 75%, or sorry, at the full loan amount. Borrowers have until June 30th to restore FTE headcount and salary levels for reductions made between February 15th and April 26th, 2020. All right, so yeah, that's a good fail-safe right there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this kind of reiterates what we just went over. I'll just go through it quickly, but yeah, I would try to keep this slide for your own records as well. So FTEs not maintained proportionally for the reduction in average full-time equivalent employees between per crisis levels and the 8-week forgiveness period, employees may not want to go back to work. Employees are competing against supplemental unemployment benefits of an additional $600 a week until July 31st, 2020. So then moving on to salary level not maintained. So if it's a reduction of over 25%, a straight payroll reduction for payroll, a straight reduction for payroll reductions over 25%. Sorry about that. Compared to the prior completed quarter of employment for workers making less than 100,000, and any proceeds spent outside the 8-week qualifying window. 75% not spent on payroll. So it'll be, so I guess it would, the forgiveness amount will just be reduced. The whole loan won't, it won't turn into a loan per se. It'll just be reduced by the amount that you go over the 75%. The EIDL emergency grant up to 10,000 will be subtracted from the forgiveness amount. So as mentioned earlier, you can apply for both. This says pretty blatantly that any amount approved for the EIDL will be subtracted from your PPP loan. Next slide, please. All right, so economic injury disaster loan. So this is another program. I'll have Johnny go over this. Johnny, are you there? I'll hand it right over to you.
Yeah, perfect. All right, and next slide, please. So the economic injury disaster loan, also referred to as EIDL. So this is the loan that you can apply directly with the SBA. And so the initial round of funding also ran out, but during this next round of funding, $50 billion was set aside to take new applications, along with $10 billion for the grant portion of this as well. It hasn't opened up yet as of this morning, but with this loan, the maximum that you can apply for is up to $2 million. Now, with the application itself, when you do apply, it doesn't ask you for an amount that you're looking to apply for. SBA is going through each application on a case-by-case and determining what the amount that you qualify for, and you can either accept that amount or request for consideration for a higher amount, or alternatively get a lesser amount. The average amount originally was about $25,000, but because there was so much demand for this, they reduced that amount to about $15,000 per borrower. Now, the interest rate on this loan is 3.75% for profit businesses, 2.75% for if you're an eligible nonprofit, and this is a 30-year loan. So the very generous length of term, which will allow for lower monthly payments, and it's deferred for a year, so your first payment won't be due until a year after. Now, this isn't forgivable like it could be potentially on the, as far as the PPP. This is a loan that's intended to cover any operating expenses, payroll, any overhead, and there is no collateral for loans under $25,000, and no personal guarantee required if it's under $200,000. But again, the average loan size, it's been about $15,000. Next slide, please. One thing I'll mention is if you filled out the, it's taking some time. I think originally with the disaster loan, you had the option to check off a box if you wanted to be considered for the grant. So with the grant, it was originally, I think the common misconception was that you can get right off the bat $10,000, but they have capped it to about $1,000 per employee. And if you originally filled out the old application and didn't have that option for the grant, folks were advised to reapply using the new system. So if you applied way back when and you still haven't heard or haven't back, definitely recommend reaching out to SBA by calling or sending an email or submitting a new application if you had used the old system. And the great thing is you won't lose your place in the initial queue. And this here just shows kind of what the breakdown is of as far as the EIDL loans by states and overall. So in Massachusetts, there have been about 768 loans approved, and about 150 $3 million. And again, this has been replenished for an extra $50 billion. Next slide, please. And this is, yep, so this just shows what the application looks like. So again, this is the newer application. So if you've applied for the EIDL loan and through the old system, you are being encouraged to apply through the new system. And next slide, please. And this is what I had alluded to earlier regarding the grant. So again, it is $1,000 per employee, and this does not have to be repaid. It's intended to be used to keep employees on payroll, to pay any sick leave, cover any costs such as debts, rent, or any mortgage payments. And originally, the promise was that you would get this within 3 days of the application, but that has turned into weeks just given the demand for it. I've had some customers that it took about a month just to get that grant. Next slide, please. And this just shows what the documentations that would typically be required for the EIDL loan. May request up to 3 years of business tax returns, a personal financial statement. Based on feedback I've received from clients is that they have not been asked to ask for these documents unless they're looking to be considered for a higher amount. But just a great idea to have all these documents ready ahead of time just in case it is needed. Next slide, please. And this is in terms of how do you check up on the status of this. The best way is to either call this number here, or you can also send an email as well. Just know that given the amount of volume there can be extended wait times. But it is taking about, they're saying about 4 to 5 weeks to get an update on that. Next slide, please. This just walks through the process, the 3-step process for the application. You apply online. There is a credit pull, and then you may be asked for additional information. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Raj to discuss the SBA business debt release options.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. So small business debt relief. This actually is a really great program, and it's a little less, well, it's a lot less work on your end. Actually, it's no work on your end if you have an SBA loan. But let me just go through this slide, and I'll get to the details later. So essentially, the SBA will pay 6 months of principal, interest, and any fees associated with any 7A, 504, and microloans. Essentially, almost any small business SBA loan that you have will automatically they'll pay 6 months payments for you automatically. So the bank doesn't need to do anything. You don't need to do anything. For loan, and however, let me just read this. So this relief is not available to the PPP loans or the EIDL loan. Borrowers do not need to apply for assistance. It will be automatically provided as follows. For loans not on deferment, the SBA will make payments with the next payment due on the loan and will make 6 months payments. For loans that are already on deferment, the SBA will be making payments with the next payment due after the deferment period has ended and will make 6 monthly payments. For loans that are made after March 27th, 2020, the fully dispersed prior to September 27th. So this is loans or even SBA construction loans that are fully advanced before September 27th. The SBA will begin making payments with the first payment due on the loan and will make 6 monthly payments. So through amidst all this, it's also a great time to apply for an SBA loan for something new, business expansion or anything like that, because they'll pay your first 6 months payments for you. Next slide, please. The SBA has notified 7A 504 microloan lenders, such as Johnny and I, East Cambridge Savings and Eastern Bank, that it will pay these borrowers these loan payments. Lenders have been instructed to refrain from collecting loan payments from borrowers. If a borrower's payment was collected after March 27, 2020, lenders were instructed to inform the borrower that they have the option of having the loan payment returned by the lender or applying the loan payment to further reduce the loan balance. Me personally, I think they implemented this a little later. So for a couple of my customers, the payment was made and it was actually returned to them in a check or deposited in their checking account. So borrowers, you should contact your lender if you have any questions regarding this. It's fairly simple, but each bank might have their own way of doing it. Next slide, please. All right, so back to you, Johnny, on the SBA Express Bridge loan.
Perfect. Thank you, Raj. And just to add on that, with the SBA debt relief payments, so if you're unsure if you have a business loan, if you're unsure if it is an SBA loan, you can refer to your original loan agreement. It would specifically say SBA there, or you can also contact your lender, and they can determine if it is an SBA loan, if it hasn't already been refunded back to your account. So the SBA Express Bridge loan, so the intention of this was to serve as quick capital while businesses were waiting for to hear back from the EIDL loan. So this allows small businesses who currently have a business relationship with an SBA lender to access up to $25,000. And this can be used for any expenses that to help overcome any loss of revenue that you've experienced. And with this, the terms are up to $25,000. It's going to be a quick, fast turnaround and can be repaid in full or in parts by proceeds from the EIDL loan. Now, the only concern though with the EIDL loan, where the average amount was about $15,000, if that's something that would have to be taken into consideration when you are, if you are applying for Express Bridge loan. Next slide, please. And this is just a list of all of the resource partners from SBA. This is important to note as well, because Congress had designated about $275 million in extra funding for these resources, such as SCORE, the Center for Women in Enterprise, the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center. So I know that a lot of businesses have been focused on getting the PPP, getting the EIDL, which they should be, but also I think it's important to tap into these resources that can help provide guidance on how you can pivot your business during this crisis, or help you create a disaster plan for when this is all is over. And I know SCORE, we work Chamber of Partners with them as well, and so they're one of the great resources here. Next slide. This slide just to alert folks to beware of scams. There's a lot of scams out there using the SBA logo and attempting to request information. Lenders out there that aren't approved lenders by the SBA that are trying to get information to apply, and know that the SBA, specifically with the PPP, is not, lenders are not able to collect any fees for these applications. So if you have a lender that reached out to you and mentioned that they're going to charge a fee, it may be a scam and not be an approved lender. Next slide, please. And next slide. And then just in full transparency, information is so fast and fluid, and things are changing daily. And the SBA, along with the Treasury, continues to issue guidance almost daily. I think they came out with additional guidance yesterday as well. But know that in times like this too, it's important that that businesses are working with their lenders, with their accountants, and all the resource partners to be able to help navigate the questions or any answers regarding any of the programs as well. Next slide. I think that's it. Perfect. So that covers the our slide presentation of it, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Joan.
Absolutely. Let me just get myself. All right, so we can do some Q&As right now, if that's okay. Some people had sent in some questions already. Some people have already put a few questions on chat, so why don't we start with those that were sent in ahead of time. All right, first question is, how do you determine which businesses have the greatest needs?
All right, so I can take that. So, I mean, it's not up to us to determine who has the greatest need. I guess in terms of actual loan amount, we use that standardized formula, average monthly payroll, which we do verify whether with a Schedule C payroll filings, or even some payroll providers are providing special PPP documents to give to banks. We'll take that as well. So that's how we determine the loan amount. And just on the application side of things, it's first come, first serve, no matter how big or small you are.
Thank you. What types of businesses have the hardest time accessing these funds?
I could take that. I think originally during the first round, I think we saw that the businesses that were able to access this were those that had a relationship with their banker, or had an existing one, especially if you had a larger bank. But with this second round, the SBA has implemented a pacing mechanism. So to what Raj had mentioned earlier, is to ensure that banks across the country, regardless of geographic area, had equal access opportunity to the system. So even though it's a first come, first serve basis, I think that the ones that are going to have a harder time accessing this, I think, would be those that perhaps there may be language barrier, or who are currently bank with a bank that's not an approved lender, so they have to look elsewhere through a fintech approved lender or another bank that's accepting new customers.
Yeah. Also, I'll add that where I've been hitting some snags is if customers don't have their payroll, they don't have their payroll in order, where they I've had some businesses that don't claim, a Schedule C that doesn't claim any income, a sole proprietor doesn't claim any income, so that's hard to base a loan off of. So I feel like customers that you just need to have your payroll documents in order.
Okay. Another question is, I would like to know whether a company will need to have completed its 2019 tax filings in order to be considered in this process.
I would say in most cases, yeah, unless we have well, I'll take it in two steps. So unless we have that PPP document from the payroll provider, or we have 2018 with a draft of the 2019 that actually it's on the Treasury website. You can fill it yourself. You can fill it in yourself, like an estimated Schedule C for 2019. So we can use that. So I think for the most part, yes, we prefer 2019 tax filings, but there are other options.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and it depends on the structure of the business. So as Raj had mentioned, if you're a sole proprietor, if you don't have your 2019 taxes completed, banks are accepting Schedule Cs to be completed. And my advice was just to kind of take a look at your 2018 Schedule C. If you haven't filed yet, kind of try to mirror that as closely as possible, because the banks will be qualifying you based on the net profit that's on that Schedule C. And if you're a partnership as well, if you haven't filed your 2019 taxes, banks are going to need Schedule K1s, which shows the partner's income, which an accountant can also, if businesses are working with accountants, they can also draft that easily as well.
That was another question that someone had asked. They had asked, what advice do you have for legal partnerships who can't have an annual monthly payroll calculation? So what you're saying is a K-1 would suffice?
Yes, yeah. If there are partnership, if they're not, and it depends, gonna depend how they're taxed. So if it's a true partnership, if they're not taxed as an S corp, Schedule K-1s are allowed to be part of that. If they have employees, that can also be used in addition to their partner incomes. So payroll reports, any proof of company paid contributions for retirement, for health insurance, state and local taxes as well.
And I'll just add that it's also capped at 100,000 per employee, including the partners themselves. Yeah,
there was definitely some confusion around on that, and I think partnerships were kind of in limbo, but the SBA and the Treasury did provide additional guidance on that afterwards.
Yeah, I actually have a cheat sheet I could send out on what documents are needed, and it's broken down by how you're organized. This is right from the SBA as well, so Joan, I can send that to you if you want to send it out.
That would be terrific. Thank you, Raj.
Sure.
Is it true that people get PPP loans through smaller banks faster than through larger banks? Is there any data supporting that?
I'll take this one since I mentioned it earlier. So there's no data. I'm just going off my own experience that I feel like some of my friends and other customers at other banks have had a little, it's been a little more cumbersome. Smaller banks like Eastern Bank and East Cambridge Savings, I feel like you can talk to someone working on your loan right away, and it's everyone's working nights and weekends to get this thing done. Bigger banks, I'm not sure how they're doing it. My advice to you, I have given this advice to a couple of people. I have some customers and friends at Citizens, Santander, and other larger banks, is just really have a strong follow-up and try to get a hold of a manager at the branch. I actually personally called a manager on behalf of one of my friends. She's a little elderly, but I mean, that's the way I got some traction. If I'm getting some requests from people that have already submitted loans, submitted PPP applications to other banks, and they haven't heard anything, and they're coming to us. My advice to them was, follow up with them. If your bank doesn't have an SBA application number or loan number, essentially SBA approved loan, then we can possibly take a look at it. But if there's two applications in, it's just going to reject the second one automatically. So the SBA will recognize if there's two applications in, no matter what bank it's from.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I read yesterday that Bank of America had about over 100,000 applications, and of those 100,000, only about 1,000 they were able to get through the first day. And it does depend too on each bank's and the technology that they're using to be able to put these applications in. So we all are using the same SBA portal called eTran, and some banks will have a direct integration into it. Some banks won't. So larger banks typically are the ones that do, but I think during the first wave, banks were able to send about 15 applications just in one batch. But with the second round, the SBA has placed an extra pacing mechanism where a bank can only do up to 5,000 in one batch. But I would say, to the bank that you're applying for, if it's a smaller bank, try asking to see, what number would they be in the queue, to kind of get a sense of, what the likelihood of your application will be going through.
Yeah.
Okay. Do 1099 contractors count as payroll expense for the PPP?
John, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take that. So, because 1099 folks can apply separately for the PPP, so that can't be counted towards their PPP calculations because they're able to apply separately.
Right. It's
I'm
its
I'm
own
sorry.
separate.
Okay. All right. I think you've already answered this. Can I receive both a PPP loan and an EIDL? And you said yes, you can. If you do not receive a PPP loan, the other option would be the EIDL or
So my advice would be check with your bank. Eastern Bank had we set aside about 500 million for, or sorry, 5 million, not 500, 5 million
Oh,
as a grant to customers. Business customers would get up to 25,000. It was a low interest. It was 3.99% over 5 years. So check with your bank and see what specific programs they have. Our program ran out actually last week, but now with this new wave of PPP loans, maybe the banks have another fund created or something like that. So I would check with your local bank and ask them kind of just what you said. You know, what is, if I don't get approved for PPP loan, what can you offer me as a backup? Because it's your bank's chance to really step up and you know, help you out.
Yep, spot on, Raj. And just to add on that too, we don't know if there's going to be a third wave of PPP. I think there's talk of, you know, of there being a third round, or perhaps there may be a modified version of it. But there are a lot of resources out there on, you know, the local level, the state level, in terms of other grants that you can apply for. But you know, for folks that, you know, aren't able to get the PPP, there are other parts of the relief, such as like the employee retention tax credit. And I think it's important to be able to know about those different resources, because they really, you know, the employee retention tax may work out better than the PPP, and that's something that a good conversation to have with the tax professional.
okay. Speaking of the PPP, we have a member who said she received an email and said that she was approved for the PPP, and she needs to e-sign immediately. However, nothing has been sent yet. Is there a chance that I will lose it if it's not signed? And how can it be expedited, as I don't want to lose it? I guess what she's asking is this typical, that there's a little bit of a lag between the time she's approved, and I know she was just recently approved, and the time you get the documents to e-sign?
Yeah, I mean, I think Johnny and I could both speak to this a little differently, because I think all banks are handling a little bit differently with the technology aspect of it. I personally have seen some delays with the e-signing. The general rule of thumb with the SBA is that the loan has to be funded within 10 days of approval. I think they may be a little lenient on that, because I've seen otherwise. But yeah, I would. With the technology, every bank is a little different. Some are slower. Like even our technology is actually really good, and we still have maybe, you know, up to a day lag time between those two emails. Johnny, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, I'd say if they're getting that email that was approved, they do have 10 days. Well, they're advised to sign it almost immediately, but as far as so that we can get the funding within the 10 calendar days. But it sounds like for that particular one, is it more so that they didn't receive the documents to e-sign? Because if it is that perhaps maybe the bank, there might have been a technical issue where they didn't attach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would follow up with the rep that you submitted that with, for sure. Because I know all the loans I've submitted that I can look up and see a status on it, and it would tell me if you've started e-signing or whether the docs have gone out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Along with that topic of PPP, this is from a nonprofit here in Malden. Is there a way the 8-week start time can start in June? Because this particular nonprofit relies heavily on grants, and grants come from the federal government and the state government starting July 1st, which is the beginning of their fiscal year. They're quite concerned about the whole grant situation, and they're wondering if there's some way that they can delay actually accessing the PPP funds.
Mm-hmm.
I can take that.
Yeah.
So the you do have the 10 from when it's approved, 10 calendar days for the funds to be deposited. So there are 8 weeks. Thus, the clock starts ticking from that point on. There isn't a way to unfortunately delay that, unless Congress decides to change that the rules on that end. But the 8-week requirement is a pretty stringent requirement.
Yeah, I think there'll be further guidance on it too, especially that what was said on the slide. That businesses have up to, I think it was June 30th, to get their full their full workforce back in line. I have a feeling something else will come, but right now the 8-week is pretty strict. But like I said, I think there'll be more further guidance on that to be a little more lenient.
Okay. Here is one more. Just see. It says it's for either one of you. After receiving the PPP loan, some dental offices might need to restructure their teams. If a dental office hires an additional dental assistant, will the new dental assistant salary be forgivable by PPP loan forgiveness criteria? And if a part-time hygienist starts working full-time, would hygienist's additional salary be considered forgivable? I think you answered that already.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general rule of thumb is, without getting like too nitty gritty, is that if you just have to spend 75% of the loan on payroll, whether because some workers aren't going to come back, they rather collect or they don't want to leave their house because of safety reasons. So if you replace them or hire more people, I think as long as you're within that 75% of the loan, you'll be it will be forgiven. In terms of if you're almost growing your staff, I don't think there's a way to increase the PPP loan amount.
Okay. So what you're saying is it's 75% of the salary as of the time that you applied.
No.
It doesn't, and it's not on the individual level.
No, just of the loan amount. So 75.
So
So whatever. Yeah. So the loan amount is calculated 2.5 times the monthly employee cost, payroll cost.
Yeah. Okay.
So as long as 75% of that loan, those funds are allocated towards paying your employees or maybe new employees, that should be fine.
Okay. Terrific. We've reached the end of our questions. Does anyone else want to put one up on chat? Another option would be if Johnny and Raj are willing, you could email me further questions and I could send them along to Johnny and Raj on your behalf. You can send them to info@maldenchamber.org if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions. At this point, go ahead.
I'm sorry. One thing I'll mention, I know that there's a concern about with the current stay-at-home orders and being extended to May 8th is, for the non-essential businesses or even essential businesses that are not open, is for the businesses that receive the PPP where you have the 8 weeks to use it. The concern is, do I pay my employees while there's no work, right? And that's where one of the things that and it has to be kind of considered is when you're looking at what the next 2 8 weeks will look like, is because 75% of that has to be used for payroll in order to be forgiven, and it would be that would be a business decision at that point whether if you decide you're going to pay your employees for no work. I think it's important to kind of think about if you're a restaurant, how can I pivot my business and maybe have if I'm paying that employee so I can get this forgiven, can I have him do something at home? Maybe have him do some social media marketing, things of that nature. And also for and on that end as well too is and this is also especially important for restaurants, is that in the initial calculation of the PPP, if tips were included as far as determining how much we were eligible for, and after COVID, if you're taking on employees back, and some of the things that businesses are considering doing is offering hazard pay as a way to kind of incentivize employees to come back, so that they can come off unemployment. But coming up with different ways to kind of incentivize them to come back on.
There is one final question. It says, the question goes, how will the SBA go about the accounting of expenses to know what is spent on payroll, rent, etc.? Is it up to the business to submit reporting, or is there another way they will do accounting to determine the forgivable portions of the loan?
So, Johnny, I don't know about you, but I haven't received so much guidance on what actual documentation will be needed. But I'm assuming it's going to be, payroll, maybe a payroll filing or payroll stubs, something that just proves that you've been paying employees. Johnny, have you received any info on that yet?
Yeah, no, the SBA hasn't, and Treasury hasn't issued any final guidance on that. They were supposed to as of last Friday, but it still hasn't been out as of today.
So yeah, if you want to email that one to us, I think we should have more information on it, and hopefully I'm hoping they give us a template. I know some accountants have a templates that I can't really share because they developed them. But I think soon enough we'll have something from the SBA that we can send out to everyone.
Okay. We've been asked if you two would provide your contact information. Would that be all right, Raj and Johnny?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you want to give it now, and then I'll include it in a follow-up email as well?
Yep, I can put it in the chat.
Okay, great.
All right, I'll put mine in the chat as well.
All right. And if for anybody who wants to spread the word, this will also be available on YouTube as well as on the UMA website, which is matv.org, very soon. So if there's anything else people want, put it in the chat. Johnny and Raj just put their contact information in the chat. And I think everybody knows how to reach the chamber. Once again, info@maldenchamber.org.